I'm Kevin Hoare, and I'm here on the 25th of March with a very special guest. He is the National Committeeman-Elect for the state of Oregon, Dan Mason. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. Good to be with you.
I didn't get to cover all of your bio. You're the guy who famously helped co-found and then continue the great Reagan dinner tradition in Washington County that started. What year was that it started?
2015. I think you were part of that first meeting where we were pitching the idea and hoping that the exec team would approve it that night. And there was plenty of people that did not believe in that room. Shocker.
Yeah, and it's one of those things like we always used to do Lincoln Day dinners, right? And the Democrats used to do, I think they used to do Jackson dinners. Okay. That was their old tradition. And so some people just like, well, why don't we do the same, what we've always done? And I know that I was very amenable to the idea that Ronald Reagan really represented the modern Republican Party, but it also somebody that we wanted to commemorate somehow. And even though there are Lincoln dinners that are still held, it's funny because their birthdays are all around the same time.
Oh yeah.
And the dinners almost never happen close to those birth dates. And so the Reagan dinner was a great event, and that really started bringing people to the state of Oregon who were interesting speakers, ones that sometimes knew something about Reagan, and then other times they knew something about, the highest levels of government, and such as Mike Pence, the former vice president, right? We had the governor of, is it South Dakota?
Yep, Kristi
Noem. And we had, we had the former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. And but then there's been others that are really interesting. Like you guys had Andy Ngo as a speaker. That's the only one I missed, by the way. That was the only one I've ever missed.
Okay. Well, that was a good one. I mean, we had, typically it would be a 4-speaker set. And we, that year we had former Governor Scott Walker. And we had this was when Timber Unity was new. And so Mike Peel was one of our speakers based on his experience with Axman, the History Channel show that was big, I think about 5 years ago. And and then we had Peggy Grandy come back because she was promoting the World for Brexit, and she was working very closely with Nigel Farage. And then somehow we ended up, that summer, the Andy Ngo issue was big, and Harmeet Dillon was his lawyer, and we had a connection, or Harmeet connected us with Andy Ngo, and it was quite lively, to say the least, because I got a call from him the night before the event and said, Antifa is planning to kill me at your event. And he was scared. He was taking the threat very serious.
And he had every reason to be concerned about that.
Absolutely. And I messaged the Washington County Sheriff, Pat Garrett at the time, and he connected us. The Tiger Police checked it out, said this is a legit threat. We got to take it serious. And we went within 12 hours of having a full out, military police type presence before the BLM riots. So it was a big deal. They provided a great safe environment. We did have some protesters, but I remember Governor Scott Walker going, "Well, this is the first time that the protesters aren't here for me," because they were there for Andy Ngo. So no, we've had the Reagan dinner has been lively. It's been a wild adventure. It was going back to your original point. The whole goal was to promote and celebrate, because in 2015 there wasn't a lot of things to celebrate that summer. This was before Trump came down the escalator, when we were promoting this event, and it was celebrating the 35th anniversary of Ronald Reagan winning the White House. He was the last Republican to do that, winning the state of Oregon. And I had ran for the legislature and had a contact that knew his former executive assistant post-presidency, Peggy Grandy. So I was like, oh my gosh, we can bring in somebody who worked for Reagan. I think we brought in Greg Leo, who was the campaign contact in the state of Oregon. And yeah, it was just a celebratory night that turned out to be an annual event.
Yeah, and I noticed. I mean, I started bringing even from the very first one. I think you might have met him. A retired Marine Colonel, Mike Howard. He and his either his son or his wife or both would come to this. Sometimes I'd bring my parents, and then after the first one, they were like, "We hope let us know when the next one is." And it's sort of gained traction that way. Like people started saying, we really need this, and we need to do this again. And so I would just let them know when the next one would come around, and before you know it, we'd have another table full of people wanting to come to the next Reagan dinner. And I think a lot of people don't know that these dinners take place until they get involved with the party and they get an invitation, and they're like, "Wow, I had no idea that this is going on in Oregon." Or that it was even possible that you would get some big name speaker or somebody connect with Ronald Reagan who would tell these amazing stories like Peggy would.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, I got involved in my first political activity by going to an event. And so I think when you go to an event, you have an experience, you meet some people, there's some type of energy, amongst that process. And that's what, and then I saw that as the value in having events and, bringing in the casual political person and engaging them more in the process. So I think that's where the value is. And it's hard. You got to bring people to Oregon is tough because we're not a swing state. We're not a red state. We are a blue state from about as far away from Washington D.C. as you can, get. So it's not easy for people just to kind of pop over here and do this. And so you got to spend the money. You got to bring people here to keep your folks energized about what they're doing. It's hard enough being a Republican in Oregon. You got to bring people here to inform, inspire, equip, motivate folks, and keep energy moving.
That's right. And I think it did that. And that's one of the reasons why people liked it. And then it also gave us a perspective that people actually do pay attention to what's going on in Oregon. There's a lot that's going to be going on in Oregon this year. And just when people would write off a state like Oregon, we might actually be at the center of what happens as to whether or not so much the presidency, but maybe the House of Representatives in particular, whether it ends up staying in Republican hands or not. And it's events like the Reagan dinner that tend to highlight and draw attention to this, both locally and beyond.
Yeah, no, and I think that Lori Chavez Dreamer, attended our events early on, or I should say before she was officially a candidate, and then obviously showed up in 2021 and 2022, and you can even see some of her. I think some of her campaign commercials were shot at our event, or just some of the video. Because it is one of those few events where you bring in 65% of the attendees for the Reagan dinner in Washington County are not from our county. And so kind of going along those lines, it draws the attention across the state of Oregon, brings elected officials together. It's a kind of an eclectic group of grassroots donors and elected officials from all over Oregon. And, that's what I try to do that with these events is put on quality things where you can, if you go, you're going to get some value, but you're going to meet some people and you're going to see a different type of an Oregon Republican Party that's definitely energetic and building and battling for the future. And I think that's the most important, because if you're going to attract more people to us winning across the board, you have to have a brand that appeals, across the board to both the base, to independents, conservative leaning, Democrats. There are a few of them out there. They're limited, but they exist.
Fewer than there used to be, for sure.
Yeah. And then even some of the independents out there are just Republicans in exile. You're trying to bring them back to the team through different methods. And I think that's when people are meeting sharp, ambitious, motivated conservatives, they're more apt to engage on other projects, that our state needs.
Yeah, and I think showing that there's some fight means showing that we can get together and celebrate what it means to be not only a Republican, but celebrate a great Republican like Ronald Reagan that reminds us of so many things that we know we have to keep in mind, because a lot of people, I remember there's a bumper sticker that my parents had on their car. It said, I really miss Reagan. But you know what? Remembering Reagan and then reminding future generations who never even knew him. And I've taken my son to the Reagan dinner. I've seen others take younger people to the dinner, and then they get to hear something that makes them feel a part of something bigger, and they begin to appreciate a historic figure like Ronald Reagan. I know that we have to actually keep that spirit of Reagan alive, and the dinner actually does that. So thank you for being the guy who really makes that happen. And so switching gears to where we're at now, national committeemen. So there were several candidates, and you prevailed. That was a meeting that takes place once every 4 years. It's a central committee meeting, which the central committee consists of like the chair and the vice chair and delegates from each of the organized counties. I think there's 32 or 33 out of 36 that are organized. We gathered in North Bend for a meeting that takes place usually about 3 times a year. And at this one, this particular one, every 4 years, we vote on who we want the national committee man and the national committee woman to be. And those positions represent the state along with the state chairman, at the Republican National Committee. The one that we hear about in the news a lot actually governs the national party, makes its rules, organizes the national convention, and decides how that's going to function and operate. But National Committee man, tell us a little bit about what that means to you, and how you see this as, the role that you're now going to be fulfilling, which I guess officially you're like the National Committeeman-Elect, right? Because until
July.
Until the end of the Republican National Convention, when you officially take office, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I think the official role has been viewed in a couple different perspectives, whether it was just a national vote at the RNC level, or whether it was a dual role. Technically, you are a member of the exec team for the Oregon Republican Party, and I think that's from the feedback that I've heard, and I've been volunteering and working in campaigns for 20 years in Oregon, 20 plus years, not to date myself too much. But I think, you got to have, because we're not a swing state, and it's hard to get national attention and national donor activity to come to Oregon. You've got to, parlay, local donors and local interests with, folks that would be interested in Oregon nationally, which is, frankly, it's going to be limited. So I think the way I viewed this position as, I operate in 3 different buckets. I've been a public official, currently on the Oregon Government Ethics Commission, a Republican bucket of activism, from hosting dinners, from hosting events, running for the legislature, serving on boards, and just impacting Republicans across the board, whether it was Dennis Richardson or, Lori Chavez Dreamer, or being, helping school board candidates, county commission candidates in Washington County. So that experience. And then the third bucket, which is I work in housing, a community manager for a multifamily property and company, and which has me involved in Multifamily Northwest. I'm past president, pushing back on a lot of the bad housing bills that have wrecked housing supply in Oregon, raising money for legislative candidates that care about, housing issues. And so I think being in these 3 buckets have built the relationships that I think that it takes to build, frankly, the resources to make our candidates competitive. And that's competitive from Hood River to Medford, from Klamath Falls to the coast, to the Portland Metro, and across the board, because you can't just be competitive regionally. I mean, you got to be competitive across the state if you are going to win statewide. That's obviously a priority. I think we've got a great opportunity to win some congressional seats. Obviously, the 4th district is going to be amazing. The 6th district, as we saw, we lost by 2 points. And then obviously the hold seat, Cliff Bence's seat over in the 2nd district, isn't competitive. It is a lock solid Republican seat, but obviously, we want to, get our. I think there should be a scenario where we get to, 50-50 split minimum in Oregon amongst the 6 congressional seats. But it's going to take resources, and it's going to take, a team working, aggressively, across the board. And so I view that as a unique opportunity for us and to draw attention. And, with these retiring Congress people right now, we have a 1-seat majority.
It's a 1-seat majority. That's right.
And there's some folks that disagree with Lori Chavez Dreamer. And, right now, if she wouldn't have won that seat, there's a chance that the Democrats would be in control. And I think that's also why she is bringing a lot of attention to Oregon that would otherwise be ignored because how important that seat is. Because it was, the first for those of you who don't know, I know you have obviously a politically astute audience, but she was the first pickup since the 90s. Lori Chavez Dreamer is the first Republican woman ever to be elected to Congress. She's historic in her own right, but that's also carrying a Democrat-leaning district. So I think it's like 4 points, 3 or 4 points.
The first one from Oregon, right?
First one from Oregon.
Yeah. That is the razor thin edge, and we do have 2 other districts, the 6th and the 4th, that are very competitive. We know that from not only past election cycles, but also what we're seeing and happening in those districts right now. And so, like you said, a 50-50 split is very realistic. There's even an outside chance of a 4 out of 6, which would be just insane. And people would have to say that if we succeeded at that, Oregon is actually on the map politically, certainly for 2026.
Yeah, no, I think that, and, after redistricting and, every 10 years, the census, produces different numbers that, create the redistricting opportunity. We gain a seat. And so for, 20 years, that map really, didn't change much. And so all of a sudden we gain a congressional seat. It kind of, and granted, the Democrats have gerrymandered these things down to the legislative level in an unfortunate way. And, the Washington, D.C. Democrats drive that process. Make no mistake. That is not just a bunch of Oregon Democrats trying to figure this stuff out. And they know down to the precinct level, unfortunately. But there was, 3 competitive seats, where before, you were lucky to get one extra competitive seat. In addition to, what they've historically done from Greg Walden on, where they put all, half the state of Oregon into one congressional district, which I'm shocked that more people don't absolutely rage about that. That they, Cliff, and I remember talking with Cliff, he's got one of the largest congressional districts via landmass, outside of having an entire state. There's one congressional district for Alaska, one congressional district for South Dakota, but his district goes from LeGrand to Medford, and all the way in between, and nobody looks at that and goes, "Oh, that's equal representation across the board." They cut that in a way so they can maintain as many majority seats as possible. It's terrible. They should absolutely get called out on it, but even then, you still have 2 to 3 additional competitive congressional districts. And so if we had a basic redistricting commission, that's almost, I've argued every commission in the state of Oregon should have the same breakdown as the ethics commission, which was restructured after the Kitzhaber scandal, which is 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, 3 other party or independents, non-affiliated, 2 of which are selected by the House Republican office, sent to the governor, 2 by the Senate Republican office, and then 2 are sent by the Democrat office of the Senate, 2 are sent by the House Democrat office, with the ninth lone pick being the governor's. If you had a redistricting commission that was even remotely that balanced, you would not have the type of gerrymandering stuff that happens in the state of Oregon. It would completely be revamped, and people wouldn't be as over the top about what's happening in Oregon. I mean, you wouldn't want it. You probably maybe half the state wouldn't want to move to Idaho. Maybe you actually have some more balanced government. It'd be amazing.
Well, and that's the thing, is that then people would have to listen to each other rather than having people just say, well, I'm going to take my my toys and go home, or we're just going to ignore you and steamroll you. And that actually is what's created a lot of the dysfunction, right? I mean, I'm still glad that the state senators last year, the Republicans, actually stood up to what was happening in the state Senate, but that was a byproduct of a dysfunction that they themselves didn't cause. And you just pointed to it. It's like redistricting. It drew districts that weren't representing communities of interest.
Right.
It was representing the political desires of, frankly, mainly the governing party and what they wanted to see the result to be. And there is an attempt to reform that system. There was a ballot initiative called People Not Politicians that have been advancing just such a plan, very similar to what you described, that would have the breakdown that you mentioned the Ethics Commission has.
Yeah, and I think it's in a very Democrat leading state, it's one of the few places that is really balanced. And I know that from experience. I was appointed in 2017, but because I ran for the legislature in 2016, several Democrat state senators did not want me to go through, and so they were trying to kill my nomination within the appointment process. And it's a long story, but out of hundreds of appointed people in 2017, I was the only one that was a challenged vote. 23 senators, I think, voted for me, 7 voted against. And that was partly because of Mike McLean, who was the House Minority Leader at the time, worked with Peter Courtney, the Senate president. And frankly, over the course of a couple of years, I showed that I was fair, but I was direct, and was voted to be the vice chair of the commission, and in 2021 was the chair of the commission. And that was, I think it was the only Republican in the state of Oregon chairing anything at the state level. And that was just, and we had some of the most controversial cases out there. I mean, the Kitzhaber case was a challenge, and they originally wanted him, there was a deal that we voted on. We voted down because I pushed back aggressively against it, where he was going to only receive $1,000 penalty, based on, and basically not finishing the investigative process. This was back in 2017. Eventually went into 2018, and he ended up having about $50,000 worth of ethics fines as a result, based on the statutes that we dealt with. So, and at the time I said a top politician should receive a top penalty. There's no way we should be approving, $1,000 penalty and ending the investigation, which was on the table by the chair of the commission and the executive director. And so I think the Oregonian talked about, my resisting that pretty aggressively at the time. And, Sylvia Hayes challenged in court that she wasn't even a public official, which is, for those of you, that case right now is going to be looked at again because
it looms large over current events, huh?
Yeah, with Tina Kotek, creating an office of the first spouse. That's going to be a whole nother thing to revisit. But for years, Sylvia Hayes challenged that she was not even a public official, which is what ethics laws, you fall under. The second you're a public official, you fall under, these Chapter 244 statutes. And the Supreme Court eventually ruled, no, you are a public official, and hence, she ended up having, I think, over 20 plus violations of ethics laws, which led to, 6-figure fines just on that stuff alone. So, yeah, current events will be interesting. See how it all plays out with the current governor.
So my understanding, the I do want to come back to a little bit about the RNC and to talk about that, since that's an important aspect of what you'll be dealing with now. But Governor Kotek, apparently the first spouse, the office of the first spouse, some of the aides to Governor Kotek had quit because of their disagreement with the fact that the governor is going along these lines here and creating this office, a taxpayer-funded office, to a person who's not been elected by anybody and has no official role in the state government.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting time. Well, I'll leave it at that, because who knows where some of this may end up. But I think the Willamette Week is aggressively reporting on some of this and why those staffers ended up leaving. What was the driving force? I mean, you never know. I mean, obviously there's burnout, at that level. But were we a year and a half in, and to already lose the chief of staff? That is not common, right?
Right. Yeah, and also, if you're the governor, unless you like to have a tempest in a teapot to distract people, which is a possibility, this is not the issue that you should be getting headlines about. You should be talking about how you're doing amazing stuff to end the unsheltered homelessness and addiction crisis on our streets. But she's not getting those headlines. There's a lot of headlines about a lot of money being spent and a lot of problems that are still getting worse. So I don't know. I know that every once in a while they go down these rabbit holes and start creating issues, but at the same time, who's solving the problems that everybody expected these guys are hired to solve? You got 2 years left.
Well, and there's not a lack of resources, because the homelessness industrial complex is fully funded through 13 to 15 plus different entities in the city of Portland alone. And, most of the people do not see that as productive. I mean, there's constant headlines with the city of Portland battling with Multnomah County on, what they should do and how they should handle different things. But unfortunately, one thing that they are doing, they are dishing out rental assistance dollars in high numbers to get some of these folks just into apartments across the board. And a lot of them aren't background checked. A lot of them have other, problems. And you're making these multifamily properties because I'm on the board with all of these guys, and we hear these horror stories about dangerous people, getting dumped into their apartment properties without the right support, without the right help, and you're creating I don't want to say war zones, because that's probably pretty extreme, but they're really unsafe environments, and crime is going up. If you're Multnomah County or city of Portland, the police response rate is much lower because they're overwhelmed and underfunded in a lot of cases. I mean, it's a challenging environment, and so their solution, most people would agree who are on the ground, managing these communities. Keep in mind, a multifamily property in Portland Metro, can have 500 to 1,200, people living at it. You have a small city, and so if you aren't responsibly handling or equipped with all of a sudden this influx of folks coming in off the street, going into these units, it is a really dynamic situation that can be dangerous. So, the housing first policy that the governor has pushed and promoted from when she was Speaker of the House to what they're doing as the mayor of Portland, may sound good on the surface, but can have real dangerous consequences if you don't have the right people helping these folks. Because you're basically taking addicted people, living on the street and just dumping them into these communities.
Yeah. And actually, sometimes even helping them sustain the habits, the bad addiction that they have, and all of the consequences around it, rather than getting them off of those drugs and getting them into recovery, which everybody says is the objective. But a whole bunch of these nonprofits that are supposedly providing wraparound services don't even have as their objective to get people off of meth and fentanyl, but just to keep giving them Narcan and food and tents and free straws and foil so that they can sustain whatever they're doing until they finally decide on their own they want treatment. And I think that some of the Measure 110 changes that have been made in the recent state legislative session, we have yet to see how those actually play out. But this issue is a top issue for everyone in the state. And so it's really good that you have the perspective, especially on the housing aspect of this, that you do, because this is not an issue it's going to last your entire term of office. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, I mean, they're not fixing this anywhere, shape, or form anytime soon. But I do think that what we've seen, and this is from dealing with the National Apartment Association folks, because we just had our Advocate Day back at Washington D.C., and what they all focus on is what starts in Oregon goes national. And so if you want to, find out where the bad policies that the Democrats are going to pick up and then start implementing in their own states and communities, look to Oregon, look to Portland. That's what, because they come up with so many creative ways, to unfortunately govern your community. Hence, Measure 110 has been a failure. I mean, they test it here, and then they start to try to implement it in other places. So yeah, no, I'm happy to, when I go back to the RNC, be able to educate folks on why you want to pay attention to Oregon, because unfortunately, the governing party comes up with a lot of bad programs that, other Democrats and other states run with.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're an example to the rest of the country, which is why switching gears to RNC activities, and of course the role that the RNC plays in a number of different things, including the presidential election, but also being a platform that kind of messages on behalf of the Republican Party nationally, and also acts as a conduit for resources and support that goes out to states, so that states can be either become competitive, or when they are competitive, that we can prevail. How do you, and there's a lot of other things that happen at the RNC level too. Now, I should mention we've the current national committeeman who will be concluding his term at the end of the RNC convention, Solomon Yu. He served for, I think it is 22 years, something on that, 24 years. And, we commend the time he spent serving the state party. He's and he's certainly had brought a lot of influence from Oregon to the RNC in the way that he has specialized in the things he's done. But I think he focused a lot on Republican overseas and getting some of those millions of Republicans that can vote that actually aren't in the United States. He also did a lot with resolutions. And every once in a while there was some sharp elbows going on with leadership battles within the RNC. You can look forward to facing all of that. What are your thoughts on, what would you want to be looking at the RNC? And of course, you shape how it's governed through the activities of the RNC, but also what do you want to see the RNC accomplish and do, and what is going to be your
it's going to be a really interesting time to be back there, considering they just had the leadership change with Chairman Whatley and then Laura Trump as the vice chair. I mean, it's going to be very unique. So I think there's obviously not going to be a major leadership change, because I believe this team will stay in place post November. And I think that, going back to Solomon Yu, who's been in this position for a really long time, commend his service. And when you have somebody in a position that long, you almost look at it as an opportunity to kind of see, like, where can we be more impactful, because there isn't, the same type of turnover in that position. So I think for me, look, we got to make Oregon competitive across the board. That's what I'm committed to do. And that's if that's bringing people here for fundraisers to raise the resources for candidates to be competitive, whether that's helping, candidates be introduced to bigger donors at the national level, whether it's, obviously there's going to be opportunities for resolutions and kind of reshaping the post Trump presidency, because eventually, he can win. He'll win in November. We'll have 4 more years of Trump, and we'll see where things get reset for the future. And a part of that, kind of depends on who his vice presidential pick is going to be, who is coming up. I'm guessing he's going to make the pick official probably within the next 2 to 3 months. That'll be obviously groundbreaking, because that person could be in there for another 8 years. I mean, post Trump. So I think that we're in an opportunity to reset expectations, I think, on the West Coast. And based on looking at our policy, all the policies have kind of hurt Washington and Oregon and California. Hopefully people see an opportunity for a reset. And maybe that's optimistic, but the last Republican governor from the West Coast was from California. That was Ronald Reagan. And, maybe there's going to be a time where this stuff gets reset on the West Coast. So hopefully I'm part of that, and I'm excited for that opportunity.
Do you expect that, some of the changes that are happening with the RNC now, what do you expect from those changes? What do you know about what's happening? Are you kind of hearing? Because I know, for instance, I saw it's the co-chair, Laura Trump, who's the daughter-in-law of President Trump. She was planning to bring, trying to remember his name right now, but a gentleman who specializes in voter registration at the grassroots level, and to bring him to get involved with the National Party. I'm forgetting his name right now, and I've been trying to get in touch with him, believe it or not. And it was an interesting move. What else are you hearing that they're trying to do here to get us ready for 2020?
Well, I do think it's early, and I do know that they're reshuffling staff in a big way with the leadership change. And so obviously everybody's prepping for forgive me too if you hear my daughter in the background, but okay. There's obviously an RNC national convention coming up that everybody is prepping for. And I think that's a big part. I think election security is very important and a high priority for the RNC, to make sure that we have accurate ballot chasing. They're changing their approach from make sure you vote on the day of the election to vote early and vote often, get your ballot in, so we're not spending money chasing your ballot. And so I think that even like in the non-mail in states, that's being encouraged, where that was not the priority in the past. It was go vote day of. But I think they're also saying like, hey, we're spending a lot of time, chasing people that we already know are on our side. We need them to vote earlier, so we're not spending those resources, improperly. So I'm excited about that. I mean, obviously in Oregon, we are very well aware, and we're not happy about that process. But it is, if that's the rules of the game at the moment, you got to adapt and, figure out how to, identify, voter habits, voter behavior, who's turning them in early, and then who to chase late. And, that's nobody, you can't do that for free.
What would you tell somebody? This is what's happening in Oregon in 2024. Here's who and what you need to watch in order to, they should pay attention. Oregon is on the map. What is it that they should look at that makes them think maybe there should be resources going to this state?
Well, I would say Congress is where all the activity is. Obviously, let's just say that the priority for a donor or for people in Washington, D.C. is really keeping Lori Chavez Dreamer. And I would say your priority should also be, the 4th Congressional District and the 6th Congressional District, because what we saw 2 years ago when I was helping with, that campaign, they diverted resources from the 5th Congressional to not lose the 6th Congressional. And so they almost thought it was out of the way. So when that happened, that probably, that was a big part of Lori being able to pull off that win. Mike Erickson and his campaign, he was so close, and, they were leveling him on a regular basis. Now, I think that if you have resources going into, the 4th Congressional, because that is competitive, because you do have a villain who has not represented that district very well, and I say that in a
represented way, LaMotta really well. The same group that brought down Shamia Fagan.
Yeah, the labor labor commissioner. A lot of things came out after she was already a congressperson. She hasn't had to account for any of that. I knew that she had some ethics violations. She was the House Majority Leader during her time in the legislature, so she has a lot of relationships that she has leveraged to help her become successful to win that seat. But she hasn't been challenged the way she can, and obviously we have great credible we have several candidates in that district. I know that is a massive opportunity that when I have a potential to sell that idea at the RNC, like this is a race that you should be focused in on. Same with the 6th. I mean, if you lose a seat by 2 points, that is competitive in the next election cycle, because that was, these lines we have not seen the congressional lines and how the vote comes out in a presidential yet in these congressional districts. So sure. I think that there's, and if you go back and look at Dennis Richardson, he won in a presidential. He won a statewide race in a presidential with Trump on the ballot. So when I hear my friends go, "Well, Trump's on the ballot, I don't know that we can win anything." We did. We have a record of that. So, I'm excited about pushing back on some of the narrative that has that permeated wrongly about the competitiveness of Oregon at different times. And like I said, we can point to that one congressional seat. We can also point to, Richardson winning statewide in a presidential election year.
Yeah, and actually, Dave Huguenel was a monthly visitor on our program, and he kind of has a theory that what used to be true, that midterms with lower turnout usually would be to the advantage of Republicans, and now it looks like it might have flipped, possibly because of the realignment of where there's a lot more working class voters that don't necessarily tune into these midterms, but they pay attention to presidential elections, and particularly a lot of them are fans of President Trump. So he drives up that turnout, which it used to be the opposite. It used to be the Democrats. They used to say if it rains on election day, the Democrats will suffer lower turnout and lose. I don't know that it ever made a difference about rain in Oregon, and certainly doesn't make a difference to vote by mail. But it is the case now that we may see enhanced turnout in many areas of the state that we just didn't see quite the performance we probably would have liked to have in 2022, where there's some votes we left on the table for sure, right? And then when you add to that Joe Biden, who wasn't as much of a factor in the 2022 election, is certainly a giant lodestone around the neck of candidates, especially the ones who rubber stamp them. I know that Val Hoyle in the 4th district is famous for just basically voting for whatever Joe Biden wants. And then we've got Andrea Salinas, who's not far behind. And then the rest of the state of Democrats, in the case of Suzanne Bonamici and whatever leftist, probably squad member replaces Earl Blumenauer. We're talking about people that are on the far left at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to your point about presidential, election turnout, I think that just like on the coast, you have a big group of Republican voting people that are probably registered Democrat based on the percentages. We're winning all of those seats on the coast. The coastal, the coast of Oregon has definitely had a shift. That's a big part of the blue collar workers that have come to the Republican Party that we didn't always get. So I think the opportunity, I think it could be very inspiring. And obviously we're trying to look down the road and go, can something great happen in Oregon? And you got to believe it for it to happen. I think the last couple of years, we had pickup seats 2 years ago, in both Congress and in the Oregon legislature. Why can't we do that, again? I know on the Senate side, there's less opportunities. On the House side, there's some great candidates. So I'm optimistic about the opportunities that we have. And then it's also rare that we don't have U.S. Senate races that can occasionally hurt us with driving Democrat turnout out. So that's something also to kind of pay attention to. No U.S. Senate races, no governor race. And so you have different races that will be impacted due to the presidential election cycle. So
then people
I look
say,
at it as an opportunity.
Well, and people say, why can't we be competitive in statewide races and in U.S. Senate races? And the answer is, hey, don't look at what we haven't done. Look at what we can do. Because if you start electing people to Congress, you're going to have a cadre of people not only that might be potentials for other higher offices, such as U.S. Senate. The most common thing is some member of Congress running for U.S. Senate, or somebody that runs for statewide office. And like you said, it's unfortunate that we lost Dennis Richardson when we did, but he proved that it can be done. And so we have reasons to be optimistic. I agree with you. And what's going to happen now, and by the way, 4,600 votes separates us from a tied House and Senate in 2022 in the state House and state Senate. So that sounds pretty doable to me.
Well, and I will say one of my friends who's working nationally on a project called Rural Americans for Action is geared towards, and that's Dave Duquette with Western Justice, is geared towards getting out the low propensity rural voters, which we do not have an aggressive program to get out the rural voters throughout the country, and identifying those. I think he identified, there's over 50,000 in the state of Oregon that if we would identify and got out to vote, would have changed the election, for governor specifically. And so I think those are the opportunities that I'm trying to find, connect, help with the tools to get out the vote and to really make a positive impact on Oregon long term.
Some of our folks that are following the show here tonight making comments, some said, hey, you got to vote. That's something we have to remind people. It's like, I want the election system to become transparent, accountable, auditable, trustworthy. But I also know that there's a pressing need for us to just not leave anything on the table. Nothing on the table. Like every single person that says they really, like, I'm tired of Joe Biden, he's screwing up the country. Well, then did you vote? And if they say no, they're part of the issue. Scott Pressler was the name that I was trying to think of before. Thanks, Nicholas, for mentioning that. And I think several of the folks here have made a remark that they're concerned about whether or not we can actually get that done. I know that you're going to be pedal to the metal here. I mean, even though you're the National Committeeman-Elect, you kind of already going to have to roll up your sleeves and be at work here, I think, aren't you?
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be a tricky period. It'll be a fast learning process. But at the end of the day, I've been building Republicans and battling Democrats in a lot of different ways for a long time, trying to find ways to make an impact. In a presidential cycle, it'll be, drinking from a fire hose, but I'm up for the challenge. And, we've got some great people to support, and I just need to find ways and resources to help support these great candidates that we have.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up here tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. Please come back and give us updates. I know that folks are going to want to hear not only progress reports, but stuff happens at the national level. And you're going to be in a position to hear and understand it, and maybe even explain it to folks in a way that they're not going to get from the media, especially the media that's trying to destroy Republicans day in, day out, 24/7, 365, right? So I hope you do come back and join us.
Happy to. Absolutely, Kevin. Yeah, anytime you need me to come back, I'm happy to.
Well, congratulations again on your election, and good luck with everything. And we will see you the next time you're on. And I hope everything. I think that this is actually a great way to kick off this part of 2024, which is we're heading now into the primary election season, where we're going to find out just how many great Republican candidates we have to head into the fall. So thanks again for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow on the next episode of The Captive Audience. Don't know who's going to be on yet. We're going to surprise you. One of the people will be me. We'll see who else. Anyway, have a great night.